All right, good morning. That is Uncle Lou here. Yep, that's right. It is me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. And it is time to update the top 25 college football ranking heading into the final weekend of the 2023 regular season. That's right, Rivalry weekend coming up, starting on Thursday night with the Egg Bowl games all day Friday, all day Saturday. It's going to be a great weekend of college football. But before we get there, we got to update this week's rankings. I haven't changed the helmets around yet, but we'll get to that. I'll do that after I film the video. But anyway, my number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all stayed the same. Georgia, Ohio State, Washington, Florida State, and Michigan. I didn't make any changes there. Georgia dominated Tennessee on the road. Another top 25 win for the Dogs. That's 3 straight top 25 wins for Georgia, Ole Miss, Missouri, and now Tennessee. So I left Georgia at 1. They, of course, play on the road at in-state rival Georgia Tech this coming weekend. I left Ohio State at number 2. I thought they had one of their better games of the season this past weekend. I know they played Minnesota, and Minnesota's not any good, but I mean, if you watch the games, or even if you don't watch the games, you can go back and watch the condensed versions on YouTube or the highlights or whatever. I thought Ohio State played pretty well. Their defense played really good again. Kyle McCord didn't put up huge numbers, but I don't think he's ever going to put up huge numbers. But he played well, and Ohio State rolled. Travion Henderson had another good game on the ground. They rolled Minnesota 37-3, and, of course, they've got the huge one coming up this week on the road at Michigan. I've got Washington at number 3. They hung on and survived against Oregon State this past weekend, 22-20. Washington held scoreless in the second half. It looked like at halftime maybe they were going to pull away a little, but in the second half, Oregon State's defense tightened up. Washington couldn't get anything going offensively, and Oregon State just kept getting closer and closer and closer, and eventually they just ran out of time. Washington holds on, gets another win over a top 15 team. I believe that's their 3rd win over a top 15 team this season. They're undefeated. They win 22-20, and they have the Apple Cup. Is that what that's called this weekend? They play Washington State, a game they should win. Washington should finish the season undefeated and headed to the Pac-12 championship game against most likely Oregon. I've got Florida State at 4. Terrible injury to Jordan Travis. Now, I don't punish teams or lower teams in my rankings based on injuries. Obviously, it may turn out that injury negatively impacts Florida State's season going forward. We don't know that. You know, if that happens, then I'll adjust accordingly. You know, if they, for some reason, lose to Florida, I don't think anybody expected Florida State to lose to Florida, so for some reason they do. And in that game, Florida State's quarterback plays terrible, then, you know, you can say, well, the Jordan Travis injury probably cost them there. But we don't know that. Who knows? I don't know. And then they've got Louisville in the ACC championship game the week after that. But they won again this past weekend against a lower classification school. They beat North Alabama 58-13 after being down early 13-0 in that game. Of course, the really bad injury to Jordan Travis. And I read today that he basically said his goodbyes to Florida State. He's headed off to surgery, rehab, and then, of course, the NFL. Sad way for Jordan Travis to end his career there, especially considering that it looks like Florida State is likely headed towards the college football playoffs, or at least they were. We'll see if they can win these next 2 against Florida and Louisville, but I've got them at number 4. They, of course, play the Gators on the road in Gainesville this coming weekend. Michigan at 5. Already talked about them with Ohio State. They play this coming week. Michigan won again last weekend, beating Maryland 31-24. Probably the closest Michigan has come to losing this year. They didn't blow out Penn State, but if you watched that game, it was never really in doubt. I mean, there wasn't a second of that Penn State game that went by that I thought, Michigan might lose. This game was close, though. J.J. McCarthy did not play well at all in this game, and defensively, I thought it was Michigan's worst game as well. But they hold on to win 31-24 on the road at Maryland. They remain undefeated, and that, of course, sets up the huge matchup this coming weekend between Ohio State and Michigan. You already know why I have Michigan ranked number 5. I don't feel the need to explain it again, but they cheated. They got caught cheating, and I'm just not putting them in my top 4. I think they are one of the best 4 teams, and I had them ranked number 1 in my rankings all season long until 2 weeks ago when we all found out that they've been cheating. So I dropped them to 5. Doesn't mean anything. The playoff committee is not punishing them or anything like that, so you don't have to get upset and bent out of shape, even though I know you will. But I've got Michigan at 5. 6, 7, and 8 stayed the same for me. Oregon, Texas, and Alabama All three won. Oregon won big on the road at Arizona State, 49-13. Bo Nix had 6 touchdowns in the first half of that game. They play Oregon State, the Civil War game, I think they call that. That's going to be a good game, Oregon and Oregon State. A lot of people thought Oregon State was going to be kind of the fly in the ointment here at the end of the college football regular season with the possibility of knocking off Washington and Oregon in back-to-back weeks. Didn't get it done against Washington. We'll see what they do in this weekend coming up against Oregon. Oregon's favored, should win the game. But, that's why they play these things. It's a home game for Oregon, so we'll see. But I left them at 6. Texas, I left at 7. They beat Iowa State 26-16 on the road in Ames. Iowa, they play Texas Tech this coming week. Not a very good season for Texas Tech. Texas should finish the regular season 11-1, headed to the Big 12 championship game against, most likely, it looks like, Oklahoma State. We'll see what happens with that this weekend. At 8, Alabama, again, kept them there. They beat a middle school team, Chattanooga, 66-10. They got the Iron Bowl coming up this weekend on the road at Auburn. Auburn team, they got absolutely just an embarrassing and humiliating loss for Auburn this past weekend against New Mexico State. So Iron Bowl coming up this weekend. 6, 7, and 8 stay the same. 9 and 10 stay the same. I've got Louisville at 9. They beat Miami. Close game. Back-to-back weeks for Miami. They have played top 10 teams. They played Florida State last week, played Louisville this week. Both games they lost by 7 points. So pretty good showing for Miami, but they come up short again by a touchdown, losing. Louisville gets the win on the road at Miami, 38-31, and they play their in-state rival this weekend, Kentucky. They'll be favored. They should win. Kentucky's not a very good team. In fact, Kentucky's so bad, they lost to South Carolina this past weekend. Louisville should finish the regular season 11-1, and of course, they've already locked up a trip to the ACC title game where they'll take on Florida State the first Saturday in December. Number 10, I've got Missouri. They escaped this weekend at home against Florida. Florida gave it everything they had. Again, a game where a starting quarterback went down. Graham Mertz for Florida suffered what appeared to be a collarbone injury, a separated shoulder, something like that in that game. Was unable to finish. Florida's backup, I thought, played well. In fact, had Florida in position to win the game, drove Florida down the field for what looked like a game-winning field goal at the time. Turned out too much time left on the clock. About a minute to go, they kicked the ball off to Missouri. Missouri goes right down the field, kicks what was the game-winning field goal. Converting a 4th and 17 on that drive, by the way. So the Florida defense really to blame there for that late collapse, not necessarily the quarterback injury that cost Florida there. Turned out the defense just let them down in a critical moment. But Missouri gets another win. They're still at just 2 losses. Kept them at number 10. They play on the road at Arkansas this coming week. So they should finish the season 10-2. And it's going to be interesting to see how the New Year's Six Bowls play out. That's going to depend on what happens, of course, in the Georgia-Alabama game, I think. The score of that game, who wins, things like that. But there's a very strong possibility Missouri could be headed to a New Year's Six game, which would be a huge, huge win for that program. And Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri getting an invitation to a New Year's Six game. But there it is. There's a top 10. So we avoided sort of all the upsets or disaster scenarios that a lot of people thought might be coming this weekend. If you look at the top 10, you had several teams that were playing on the road against pretty good opponents. You had some top 10 teams that were actual underdogs. You start with Georgia. They were on the road at Tennessee, who was ranked in the top 25. You had Washington playing Oregon State, who was ranked in the top 15. You had Michigan on the road at Maryland, which ended up being a lot closer than a lot of people thought. You had Texas having to travel to Iowa State. You had Louisville on the road at Miami, and you had Missouri hosting Florida. You had significant percentages of people thinking that any of those teams could have lost this weekend. As it turned out, they all won. There were no major losses within the top 10 this week, so everything stays basically the same there for me. I've got Penn State at 11, Oklahoma at 12, Ole Miss at 13, LSU at 14, and Arizona at 15. Arizona might be the most surprisingly good team in the country, maybe them or West Virginia. The combined win totals in the offseason for those two teams, if you added them up, barely reached bowl eligibility. Both of these teams were expected to win around 3 or 4 games. Arizona looks like they're going to finish 9-3. And West Virginia is, what are they at, 8 wins already, whatever it is. Those two teams have massively overperformed. Arizona at 15 this week. They beat the absolute soul out of Utah. You rarely see Utah get beat like that. Utah's a very well-coached team. They're disciplined. They don't make a lot of mistakes, penalties, or turnovers. It's very hard to blow out Utah. Arizona did it 42-18, and they play on the road at a bad Arizona State team this week. So outside of it being a rivalry game, there's no real reason to expect Arizona to lose. They're most likely going to finish 9-3. Great season for Arizona. LSU, Jaden Daniels, just absolutely insane. 8 touchdowns total in that game. They rolled a middle school team. Ole Miss won again. Oklahoma won again. Penn State. Who did Penn State? Rutgers. Penn State beat Rutgers 27-6. So, again, no losses within the top 15 this week. Oregon State was in the top 15. They did lose. But I didn't drop them that much. I mean, look, if you're ranked 12 or 13 or 14 or somewhere in there and you lose by 2 to an undefeated top 5 team, how much really should you drop? So I did drop them down to 16, but that was, primarily because Arizona won big. I felt like they deserved to be rewarded. I thought about putting Oregon State at 14 and LSU at 16, just to be honest with you. But Jaden Daniels played so well. It gets kind of hard to rank these teams down here in the kind of like 13 to 20 range. You're talking about, a lot of 2-3 loss teams that it's kind of hard to know for sure who might be the better team. But anyway, I've got LSU 14, Arizona 15, Oregon State 16. Tulane at 17, my highest ranked group of 5 team is Tulane. They beat Florida Atlantic 24-8, and they play UTSA this coming week. UTSA is a pretty good team, very well coached. Their head coach, Jeff Traylor, is getting some Power 5 talk. I think some schools might be looking at him this offseason to maybe move him up to a Power 5 school. We'll see. But that could be a good game, Tulane and UTSA. Notre Dame, I've got them at 18. They beat Wake Forest in the Sam Hartman Bowl 45-7. Sam Hartman finally showed back up. Seems like we hadn't seen or heard anything from Sam Hartman in about 2 months. He finally showed back up and had a good game. Kansas State moved them up to 19. They beat in-state rival Kansas this weekend. And Iowa, almost said Missouri. The Missouri and the Iowa logo, if you just glance at them, they're sometimes hard to tell apart. But yeah, Iowa at 20 this week in the Uncle Lou poll. They continue to win extra inning baseball score games, this time 15-13 against Illinois. They play on the road at Nebraska this coming week, which could be an interesting game. Nebraska's been stuck at 5 wins for what feels like forever. I think 3 weeks in a row now they've been at 5 wins, and they can't get that 6th win. And it's going to be hard for them to get it this week against Iowa. But this just seems like Nebraska, no matter what they do, they can't make a bowl game. But anyway, Iowa at 20. I've got Oklahoma State at 21. They beat Houston 43-30, and they host BYU this coming week. Utah dropped all the way down to 22. I thought about how kind of where to slot them after that loss. The fact that they got blown out, though, I had to drop them significantly. So I had them at 16 last week. I move them all the way down to 22 this week. Not just that they lost, but a blowout loss to Arizona. James Madison, I've got at 23. They finally caught a loss. Did App State beat them? Yeah. 26-23, they go down to App State. College game day was at James Madison. Great atmosphere there. I like when college game day goes to the smaller, kind of out of the way schools that don't get talked about a lot. As long as they do it like once a year or so, I wouldn't want to see that every week. I like them going to the biggest games of the week, but I like that about once a year they tend to go to one of these types of games. It was a crazy atmosphere there in the morning, but James Madison comes up a little bit short. So I dropped them down. I had them at 19, dropped them down to 23. Moved Toledo into the poll. Holy Toledo, they're 10-1. They beat Bowling Green 32-31 this past week. They play on the road at Central Michigan next week, looking to finish the regular season with just the 1 loss. And Liberty into the top 25. They're undefeated. Don't look now. But Liberty's currently sitting at 11-0. They beat UMass 49-25 on the road at UTEP this coming week. There you go. The top 25 heading into rivalry week. Maybe we'll see some upsets. Georgia versus Georgia Tech. Ohio State versus Michigan. Washington versus Washington State. Florida State versus Florida. Oregon versus Oregon State. Texas versus Texas Tech. Alabama versus Auburn. Louisville versus Kentucky. Missouri versus Arkansas. Yeah. How many top 10 teams do you think will lose next week? Now, we know at least one top 10 team is losing because Ohio State plays Michigan. Do you think we're just going to have the one top 10 loss, or do you think any of these other teams have a chance to lose? Georgia at Georgia Tech, Washington versus Washington State, Florida State versus Florida. That could be interesting. Oregon versus Oregon State, Texas versus Texas Tech, Alabama in the Iron Bowl versus Auburn, Louisville versus Kentucky, Missouri versus Arkansas. Could any of those teams lose? How many top 10 teams do you think will lose during rivalry week? Again, guaranteed that one of them's going to lose because Ohio State and Michigan are playing. Do you think we will see any other losses during rivalry week in the top 10? Let me know down below. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.